The Ethiopia situation. Ethiopia is being torn apart by brutal fighting, mostly in the Amhara region. The national army is at war with a local armed group known as the Fano militia, but innocent families are also paying the price. Both sides are committing terrible crimes, including killing people without a trial and using heavy weapons and drones to bomb neighborhoods where civilians live. This comes from the war that started from 2020 until 2022, when Ethiopia was in a conflict in the Tigray region. The Ethiopian government was against the Tigray People's Liberation Front, and the Fano militia was actually fighting alongside the Ethiopian government, helping them. When a peace deal was signed in late 2022, though, many Amhara felt betrayed and shut out, especially over disputed land they believed should remain under their control. In 2023, the government announced that it would dissolve regional special forces and fold them into the federal army, and in Amhara, this plan sparked protests and then open fighting as parts of the security forces joined Fano instead. The government responded with a state of emergency, mass arrests, and heavy drone strikes, and the Fano militia, once siding with the Ethiopian government, became their enemy. A full-scale insurgency started in the region, and the scale of the tragedy is massive, as between early 2023 and the start of 2025, at least 7,700 people died, and thousands of them were civilians. The military has even attacked hospitals, beaten doctors and patients, and blocked life-saving medicine from getting through. Because of this, more than 40% of all health facilities in the conflict zones have been looted or destroyed. Also, the future of an entire generation is basically being erased, as over 4,100 schools have shut down, leaving a staggering 4.1 million children with absolutely no education. On top of the war, the government has used the chaos as an excuse to crush freedom. It used special emergency rules to arrest thousands of people without warrants, simply because of their ethnic background or political views. Journalists and human rights workers are being harassed and thrown in jail. Meanwhile, ordinary people are facing high food prices and a terrifying wave of kidnappings, in which gangs are snatching university students and demanding ransom. The global groundwater emergency. While many know about how bad the climate crisis is, they don't know specifically how bad it's getting recently. Nearly 6 billion people, which is about 3/4 of the entire human population, now live in areas where the freshwater supply is under threat. Satellite data shows that drying regions are expanding by an area twice the size of California every single year. The main problem isn't just that rivers are drying up, it is that we are basically mining the water underground. This groundwater is supposed to be our backup plan for when the rain stops, but we are pumping it out much faster than nature can put it back. In fact, 21 of the world's 37 largest underground water reserves are being emptied faster than they can refill. We are using this water mostly to grow food, as about 70% of all the groundwater we pump is used for agriculture. It is what allows farmers to grow crops in dry places like the Middle East, parts of the United States, and India. But the cost is huge. India now uses more groundwater than China and the United States combined. In the famous Ogallala Aquifer in the US, which helps grow a huge portion of the country's food, water levels have fallen so low that there is no real plan to save what is left. You have to keep in mind that when we pump too much, the ground itself also starts to change. In coastal areas, taking fresh water out allows salt water from the ocean to rush in, ruining the water supply and damaging people's kidneys if the water is consumed. Even worse, as the water is sucked out, the land above it begins to collapse. This is called land subsidence, and it is causing cities like Jakarta and Lagos to literally sink, cracking roads and breaking buildings. As the ground shifts, it can also release toxic metals like arsenic into the water, leading to higher cancer rates for the people drinking it. Scientists call this a risk tipping point, as once the water drops below the reach of our wells, the farms stop working, and there is no backup left for the next drought. We know how to fix this with better irrigation and stricter rules, but politicians often ignore it until it is too late. We are currently caught in a dangerous loop, where climate change causes more droughts, so we pump more groundwater, which makes the land sink and the water toxic. The Yemen collapse. Yemen is facing one of the world's worst crises, and it's barely being covered. The country is basically collapsing, as more than 17 million people, who make up almost half the country, are facing crisis levels of food insecurity. This number is thought to be increasing instead of decreasing, and by next year, it is expected to rise to over 18 million. In some districts, more than 40,000 people are facing catastrophic starvation. This began with a war that exploded in 2014, when Houthi rebels from the north took over the capital and pushed out the government. A few months later, in 2015, a Saudi-led coalition launched airstrikes and a blockade to try to restore that government, shattering the economy, destroying hospitals and infrastructure, and cutting off salaries for millions of people. Over time, the country split into rival zones of control. The Houthis in the north, the Saudi-backed government in parts of the center, and southern separatists known as Southern Transitional Council, or STC, backed by the United Arab Emirates. Recently, the STC launched a massive military attack, and in just a few days, they captured key cities, military military bases and the region's oil fields. This is a huge turning point because these separatists now control the entire southern coast and the oil, and they want to split Yemen into two separate countries again. Today, the economy is broken, aid is being cut, and massive flash floods are washing away the few farms that are left. On top of all of that, Yemen is fighting the worst cholera outbreak in the world. Since in 2024 alone, it reported nearly 250,000 suspected cases, which is about 35% of all cholera cases on the entire planet. There is a funding gap of $20 million, and life-saving treatment centers are being forced to close their doors. If no money comes in, sick people will simply have nowhere to go. Delicate situations like these are difficult to come by, and even if you see them, it's hard to get an objective view on them, as different sources report stuff through different lenses. That's where today's sponsor, Ground News, comes in. Ground News is a website and app designed to make reading the news easier and more data-driven. Every day, they gather thousands of articles from around the world and organize them by story, each with a visual breakdown of bias, reliability, and ownership. Let me show you how it works by taking a look at this article about Amnesty International, saying that the U.S. strike on a Yemen prison that killed dozens of African migrants may be a war crime. We can see that out of the 53 news sources, only 4 right-leaning ones reported on this, creating what Ground News calls a blind spot for those who consume mainly right-leaning sources. Not only that, but we can see the different ways this story is covered based on the political leaning of each source. This left-leaning source says Trump's Yemen strike killed 61 migrants and no combatants, while this right-leaning one says that Amnesty thinks the strike that killed dozens of migrants might be a war crime. To find articles about stories you might have missed, like potentially the ones in this video, Ground News has a blind spot feed, which shows you stories underreported by one side of the political spectrum. You can get all of this by going to ground.news/TPE or scanning my QR code, and you'll get 40% off the top-tier Vantage plan. Thanks again to Ground News for sponsoring this video. The Sahel coups. Right now, in a long strip of land across Africa called the Sahel, more than half of all terrorism deaths in the world are happening, and most people outside the region have no idea this is going on. For decades, governments in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger have neglected their remote regions, leaving people poor, unprotected, and angry at corrupt officials. After the fall of Gaddafi in 2011, heavily armed fighters and weapons flooded into the Sahel and helped launch a rebellion in northern Mali in 2012. Jihadist groups took advantage of the chaos and of local fights to spread across borders into Burkina Faso and Niger, and over time, many people lost faith in elected leaders and turned to military rulers instead. The numbers that result from all of this are terrifying. About 22.5 million people need urgent help just to eat and stay safe, with most of them being women and children. Violence has forced nearly 7 million people to run for their lives, leaving their homes behind. For example, armed groups are blockading villages to starve the people inside. They also plant roadside bombs, destroy water systems, and burn down schools. Furthermore, they are specifically targeting education, threatening and killing teachers, which has left over 1.7 million children with nowhere to learn. But it is not just terrorist groups committing these crimes, as national armies and government-backed militias are also accused of horrific abuses, including executing civilians, rape, and torture. In Mali, for example, the army has been working with Russian mercenaries, and together, they have been accused of massacres where hundreds of innocent people were killed. For years, Western countries like France and the United States had troops there to help, but the violence only spread, and recently, military leaders took over the governments in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, kicking out the Western troops and UN peacekeepers. Since 2019, deaths from terrorism have increased almost tenfold, and in 2024 alone, more than 25,000 people died in the conflict. On top of the war, the environment is collapsing. Temperatures in the Sahel are rising faster than almost anywhere else, causing water to dry up and forcing farmers and herders to fight over the little land that is left. Aid groups are trying to send food and medicine, but it is dangerous and difficult to reach the people who need it most. Mozambique's ISM insurgency. Northern Mozambique is facing a nightmare that almost nobody is talking about. More than 107,000 people have been forced to run for their lives in just the last 2 weeks, and since this conflict began in 2017, over 1.3 million people have been uprooted, with their villages being attacked and burned to the ground. The violence is driven by a group known as ISM, or Islamic State Mozambique. In 2017, in the northern province of Cabo Delgado, a little-known Islamist group started attacking police stations and villages, feeding off years of anger about poverty, corruption, and the fact that local people were not seeing any benefit from the huge gas and ruby projects on their own land. Young men with no jobs and no hope were easy to recruit, and the violence slowly turned into a full-blown insurgency. Over time, the fighters pledged allegiance to the Islamic State and became known as ISM, while the government and foreign troops tried and failed to fully stop them, sometimes committing abuses themselves. In the past,